Hello, and welcome back to the Bright Founders Talk podcast from Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. My name is Chris, and today's guest is someone who has a wealth of experience in software engineering, product management, and much more. Jim Brandt, welcome to the pod. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks. Good to be here.
Excellent. Good to have you. So we've got some quick fire questions, as we always do. What's the best way to kick off the day?
That's interesting. So I read a lot of what are productivity books, things like that, and you hear some different opinions on this. And I know a lot of people, first thing they get in, email. That's like what's all the stuff that happened overnight. We're like a 24/7. There's always a ton of stuff there. But actually, the thing that I've read and kind of try to go by is actually to not just be sort of reactive first thing in the morning, but to actually tackle, if you have something kind of lined up, tackle the hardest thing that you have for the day, sort of first thing. Because I've read just stuff that even though you're kind of still waking up, coffee, whatever, that you have your most energy. And that's when you're going to sort of, be best able to kind of tackle something that's challenging. And you haven't sort of started dividing your attention. Once you start going through those emails, you're thinking about every one of those things. So when I have something queued up that I know is like sort of challenging, whether it's like a software problem or even something with the business, whatever it is, I actually do try to do that. I try to take an hour, even 2 hours sometimes to just tackle that hard problem. And then I go in, and sometimes it doesn't always go over well because you get in Slack and everybody else is going after the emails and they're asking questions or whatever. And I try to hold it off and tackle something really challenging first off, and then get into the other stuff after an hour or two. And to be honest, when you're going through those emails, a lot of those don't require usually a lot of thinking. A lot of it's like you already know the answers, you're just responding. So usually you can do those when you're maybe not peak energy, or like you said, you don't need as much thought for those. So I find that works well for me, but counterintuitive. A lot of people, they don't do, they do the opposite.
What's your favorite non-tech way to relax?
Interesting. So I do a few things just to get outside. As people say, get outside and touch some grass. So I do cycling. I like to get out and ride my bike. And I also do, so in New York State, there's a range of mountains, the Adirondacks. There's a huge preserve. People think New York State, they think New York City, but there's huge wilderness. It's a big state. And there are mountains up there that are ranked by the ones that are all over 4,000 feet. They're called the 46 high peaks. So I do that. I go up and hike on high peaks in the Adirondacks, which is just fantastic. Beautiful wilderness up in New York State. So
nice. Okay. I suppose you have to blame Hollywood movies for sort of portraying New York as just, downtown.
No, and there's a famous, the New Yorker magazine has a famous cover where it's like the perception of the world from a New Yorker's perspective too, and it's like New Jersey, and then things go progressively like it's just fog. So that it's New York City perpetuates that also, that they're kind of the whole state. But yeah,
interesting. All right, good to know. And the final one here: what do you listen to or read that inspires you in business?
Interesting. So I guess recent podcasts, I like to listen to podcasts. There's one called Pivot with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, which they talk about like just tech stuff and a lot of stuff happening in Silicon Valley. So you can follow along with the latest Twitter/X news and things that are going on with people in Silicon Valley. And there's another one, I think it's New York Times, it's called Hard Fork, which is kind of a similar one where they kind of go over tech stuff. They've been doing interesting, they do a lot with AI and chat GPT recently. So they do a lot of experiments and with sometimes funny results. So, all the fun stuff, and then you don't have to do it. You just let them do it and listen to the podcast and see what's going on with chat GPT.
Just take the stuff that works and be like, okay, we'll steal that.
Exactly. Right.
All right. Brilliant. Well, talking about tech and AI and so on, how did you first get into computers? Like, was that something that just, interested you or did someone introduce it to you? I mean, was it something that was part of your family, or how did you come across computers in the beginning?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. If I go sort of way back, so I was a kid in the 80s, so computers were just kind of becoming a thing, and being able to have a home computer. And my parents took me, initially had a VIC-20. People remember that. It was a computer from a long time ago. I kind of maxed that out. It had, I think, 3.5K of memory. That was the computers you had. So we upgraded to a Commodore 64. I think a lot of people remember that. So I was always playing with computers kind of through high school. And then I went to college and, this was late 80s. It wasn't entirely obvious at that point that computers were going to be a job. It probably would blow people's minds at this point to think that that was a thing, but it wasn't, obviously there were jobs, but like the web, hadn't exploded yet. So it just wasn't, it was like a very specialized type thing. So I wandered away from it and ended up getting I was an English major, English and psychology were my first two degrees. So very not computers, right? So I ended up working in sort of writing for a few years and editing, and I ended up at a software company as a technical writer. So I was doing my English skills, but I kind of found my way back to computers. And as I was working there, there was a great manager there who I was working with his group documenting their software. And after, I was there for maybe a year, year and a half, something like that. And he was like, this software really well. Like after you've been doing this talk, he's like, you should probably be writing the software. He's like, do you realize how much more these people make than you're doing? So it kind of got me back into computers and again, I'd been a hobbyist. So I went back to school. And again, I was playing with computers anyway, and I was able to transition from my tech writer job over to actually just doing the software. So I kind of found my way back to computers in a non-typical sort of way.
Okay. How when you first began, or well, even when you switched back to computers, did you find from the people around you or your family and so on, was there a bit of a pushback on computers because they weren't seen as something that, it's not like it is now. So I think if I were to do the same in my family, as my family comes from a very traditional, my father's in construction, my mum's a police officer, my sister's a nurse. So like if I mention computers, it's like this alien world. Did you find that in the beginning that people were like, pursue something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that when that was happening, it was right when the internet was like end of the 90s, right when the internet was sort of taking off. But yeah, it was very unequally used and distributed. There were very technical people who were, all in online. And then there were tons of people at that point that literally just didn't even know how to get online. They did not have a computer. It's not, everyone didn't have the iPhone was still years off, like, having smartphones. So yeah, I think it was something that people would just, you'd explain what you're doing and they'd just be like, oh, okay, that's nice. So yeah, I think there was a little bit of people not being entirely clear. And actually I kind of was able to, my career kind of followed with computers kind of becoming much more accepted. I ended up going to the University of Buffalo after that. I went to school there, but then I ended up working there. And then it was right at the time where everything was going online. Like younger students were coming in and just expecting things to be online. And while I was there, we had services that students would come in and like the first day of school, they're like checking like, where are my classes? Where am I supposed to be? Expecting it to be on their computers. And in the time that I was there, like we could literally see over the summer, people would get laptops and we would see the amount of people coming to the university websites just jumping every semester. And then there'd be this huge thing after. So in the U.S., it's usually a spring and or a fall and a spring. So you have like a Christmas break. So you'd have this huge burst in the spring semester because everybody got laptops for Christmas. So they would all come back and like we would just see our numbers like, and we weren't a business, we're a university, but it was almost like your Amazon or something. Like your numbers would just jump every semester because computers would just so many more students would just have it. They were coming back with a computer. So yeah, I guess you watch that through all the 2000s as that just became expected that all that stuff would be out there.
Yeah. So I think I bought a laptop specifically to study at university, and I studied English literature as well. But when I got there, my teacher or my professors, they kind of banned any essays being researched with a computer. They like sort of forced us to go to the library. So I had this expensive new MacBook and I was like, I don't even need to use it, or I'm not allowed to use it. So, but talking about because going back to you studied also English literature and psychology, I just wanted, was that something you thought could be useful for business as well? Like, did you think, okay, I can incorporate that, or was it just something you enjoyed?
Yeah, I wish at that time in my life I'd been thoughtful enough to be thinking about a career. But yeah, no, it was just something I enjoyed. I came in and I just took, and I think this happens to a lot of people. One of the first classes I took my freshman year in school was an English class, and I'd enjoyed it in high school, but I hadn't really thought about doing it. But it was just a fantastic class, and it just kind of won me over. And then same with psychology. I took a couple of psychology classes. I really liked it. And I'm like, well, I'll just do both because I really enjoyed doing both of those. And it was actually really challenging. Those are not a clear recipe for business success, those two majors. So it was challenging when I got out. But I say now, when I talk to people about kind of how it started, it ended up being very, very useful for me. If you think about the things that you do, anybody who's in business, even if you're super technical, but especially people who are more on the business side, sales, that kind of thing, all you do is write. You write emails, you write blog posts, you write, specs for, stuff that people are going to do. You write agreements that, for the business side of things. Like if I think about my job, I still do write code. I'm technical, but so much more of my job is writing things to customers, writing things to other engineers that work for me, like specs, things like that. And being able to just write clearly, correctly, use words the right way, which sounds silly, but just often people do, they'll mimic stuff that they've seen and they don't always totally know. And it matters. Like it really can matter. And again, if you got the background, you see this too, you see writing online and you're like, oh, this blog post could have been so much better. So I found that background has just been super, super helpful, and I use it every day, so yeah, it turned out okay.
Good. Well, I think it's just really interesting because from my experience talking to other engineers and that kind of thing, it can be really hard to merge those two worlds between business and being efficient and the technical side, someone just knowing the technicalities of their position really well. So, I mean, do you feel like there is a lack of communication in the tech world, especially as we work in a more globalized world? Perhaps people just kind of, people from all over different countries, maybe they just use the language of their code, for example, to communicate with other engineers, etc. I just want to, kind of focusing a little bit on what we're going to talk about later, the company you work for now. Is this where it kind of started, this idea of maybe simplifying things or making it more transparent? Is this where it sort of started, or do you feel there is a lack of communication in the tech world?
I mean, it is a challenge. I think it's always a challenge. Like you said, you have the gap between, a business person who has a need. They're maybe not a software person, but obviously everyone uses computers now. So they're trying to communicate, I need this thing. And it could be a complicated business concept, right? So it could be something that they know really well. It could be, accounting or, who knows what the job is. But there's a domain knowledge that they have. And then you have, like you said, you have the software person who knows their domain, which is, making whatever it is, websites or databases, or trying to sort of make a user interface, something that people can kind of input data. And yeah, communicating between those two can be very challenging because you need the person with the domain knowledge to be able to communicate both. This is how accounting works. This is how this should be based on, whatever the rules are. And trying to communicate possibly, I need this thing that doesn't exist. And I'm trying to communicate to you, I have this vision in my head, right? And then you have the software person going, I know my tools, but I have to understand what it is exactly that you're, trying to communicate to me. And it's really interesting. I think you see it a lot in the things that software people build when they kind of don't, when they're just doing it for fun or when they are left to their own devices. We see it just, as we get to later, the software product that I work on it's an issue tracker, right? It's a ticketing system. And you see so many software teams, sometimes even in startups where they have to pivot or something and they're trying to kind of look for something to do. Ticketing is one of the things that they seem to always want to just build one because they get it, right? Software people are like, oh, I know what this is because it's a tool I would use, right? So instead of sort of being like, oh, we have some engineers, let's build something, and trying to go find some domain that they're not familiar with, they pick something that they know really well, right? So you get like ticketing systems, you get chat, you get to-do managers because they're like, hey, I want to manage all my tasks. Forget that there's a million out there. Like, this is a solved problem. You should not be writing fresh code to do this, but it's a domain that they understand. So they're going to be like, I can answer all of my own questions about how should this work because this is something for me. So that cuts out all of that communication problem, right? Because it's just you're doing it for yourself.
Yeah, I think I've heard it a lot coming from the other way as well, not just from the need or the business perspective, but also from the engineer or the developer's perspective. They're trying to tell the client that your idea is not going to work. The client's like, no, I want to have this, and it's sort of there's a bit of a mismatch between what someone can do and what someone wants, right? So I suppose we'll come on to that a little bit later with your current company. Just before that, I want to just jump to the next thing you kind of went to after you were a technical writer and you did some engineering. You're also an author, and I thought that was really interesting. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? You published a book about programming language. How did that come about?
Yeah. So again, sort of the background with writing, so I had sort of technical writing background. And I got involved also the language that I use a lot is called Perl. It's a programming language. And I was very involved in the community, the Perl community. So it's an open source language. So there's a lot of people that kind of, get together to kind of work on the language and do things in it. And I was involved in the community. And sometimes, especially when the web was kind of exploding, and this still happens now, you see this with a lot of technical books. There are technologies that are out there. People just go grab them from, GitHub or whatever, and they're using them. And there may not be like a company behind it, like a traditional software where all the documentation is produced by the company, right? Because they're selling you the software and you go and I'm using application X and I'm just going to expect the company to provide that documentation. When you have open source things, it's basically people in the community that are going to kind of get together and put together the documentation for things. And there were companies that would actually, publish books, based on this stuff. And they were publishing before so much was online, physical books, and they would publish documentation for all these different technologies. So it was basically that I was involved in the community, and it was something called mod Perl, which was like a type of Perl that you could use in a web server. So again, it was the internet explosion, and there was just a lot of big websites using this technology. So I actually got together with Stoff Speckman, who was he was the technologist. He had written most of the code. So he was actually deeply knew all the stuff with ModPro, and it was like a second edition of that. So we kind of had like all these docs, and we were trying to figure out just how to pull it together so that it could be a book, like basically chapters, and sort of make sense, start to finish. Also be a reference so you could jump in and just find what you need to find. And the other challenge was that it was ModPro 2, so there was a ModPro 1, and a lot of the reason for the book was people were trying to upgrade. So there's sections of the book that, like, if you're doing it this way, now you need to do it this way, and that kind of thing. So so I worked with him. He did, again, had done the actual coding and a lot in the software. There was the framework of a lot of the docs, but I pulled those together, and then I just worked on sort of beefing them up. I would go through myself and try to do some of the examples and things like that. So as a technologist, I could actually run the code, and I understood how to get it all set up, and then I could turn that into writing, so that we could put that together. So yeah.
Interesting. Well, yeah, very, very cool to see you're an author as well. Is there anything also you're a director. You did a bit of directing, I believe.
As director, so it's a little confusing. The company I was working at the time, it was a software company, but we worked with cable companies and telcos on getting. It was right when video was coming online. The cable companies were sort of trying to figure out how to transition to that. So we were a technology provider that worked with the cable companies. So yeah, when you see director TV video, that was like a software, like a director as like a position in the company, and it was all software. It was my groups were all software, but we were producing websites that were starting to put TV and video. So early videos before TikTok, before really YouTube was just starting. So we had all these other video providers, many of whom probably are not even around anymore. But it was just becoming a thing. Again, this is through that arc where, before people, it's probably hard to imagine now, but TikTok would have been, probably huge for that. But it was putting up websites because often people got their internet access through the cable company. People still do, right? Like your telco or your cable company. So they would have a website that you'd go to, and we did video and again, TV. They started to actually have, this was before Netflix, right when Netflix was just kind of becoming a thing. The cable companies were figuring out, how are we going to put content online? Who's going to have it? Who's got the rights? So the company I was working for was helping through all of that.
Were there any skills that you picked up or any lessons you picked up during that time that you still use today?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, if you look at sort of what kind of stretches through all of those different things, is just kind of learning how to work. And it sounds it's kind of a broad thing to say, but understanding what's back to, explaining and specs and trying to understand what it is that's wanted, figuring out how to take, and to your point about what's realistic, like what can be done, taking those and putting them together and figuring out how can you get something done? Like, how can you actually produce some kind of product? And this stretches across, all the things that I've worked on. And this is what I work with people that work for me, is try and figure out, what it is that is wanted, and then what can we reasonably do? And then the other factor is just time, right? You can't just work on something forever. There's always a component of either because someone wants it by a date, you have that time, or there's only so much someone's willing to kind of invest in it, right? They're only, if you tell people like, no, I want this cool feature, you're like, yeah, great, we can do that. And they're like, well, how long is it going to take? And if you're like, well, it's, it'll be 6 months of engineering time, but it's not worth that, right? So I think that's the other slider that you start to learn about, because when you start technical, all you're thinking about especially when you're younger in your career, is just how do I do it? You're just always really focused on the actual technology. And then I think as you move along and maybe move up a little bit, what you start to think about is that there's elasticity in requirements, meaning that people ask for something and you're like, okay, I understand. I see what you want. That's going to be really hard. What if we did it this way? I think it's pretty close and we can do it in a fraction of the time. And a lot of times there's like a negotiation there. And that's actually what they're relying on you. When business people come to you as a technologist, the first thing people think is, well, they want me to solve their problem exactly as they said it. And that's not always 100% true. They're relying on you to sort of be a consultant also, and to exactly the point you made earlier, help them understand what the technology can do and give them feedback on what's easy, what's hard, because they don't know. That's why they're coming to you. That's your domain expertise. So I think that's something that, and I think that's actually helped me in my career. I think when I've worked with counterparts on the business side, that's the part that they actually appreciate, is not just the, yes, we can, do your spec, we can solve your problem, we can get this up and running, but the feedback of, we did it this way, it's going to be about this much effort. This way is about this much effort. This way is going to have problems scaling. If this gets really popular, we're going to, it might hit, this issue. Like, it's sort of all that stuff up front, so that they can actually make an informed decision about what direction to go. And I think that's kind of followed through everything that I've done. That is a factor.
We're talking about problem solving. Tell us a little bit more about the current company, Best Practice Solutions. What do you guys do?
So our main product is Request Tracker, RT, and it pretty much does what the name says. It tracks requests. So we've actually been around for a long time, over 20 years. So it was born like sort of back in that, early days of the internet to start, tracking things online. And sometimes we joke we're the 20-year startup, still a small company, but a lot of very big customers who run with our software. And basically it's issue tracking. So it can be used across a bunch of different domains, and it is. We have customers who use it for all sorts of different things. Like the core thing that it started off as is an IT help desk, right? So you put in a request, I need a new laptop battery, creates a ticket, and then it gets tracked. The IT person can go in, they order your thing, they can communicate with you, update the ticket and say, hey, I ordered it. You get an email, all that normal sort of flow that people are familiar with the help desk. But once you have a system that basically, tracks tasks, handles communication, you can put multiple people on it. It grows into a bunch of other things. So that's, it's all these different things now that we have customers who use it in all sorts of different ways.
Is there something specifically with your company you've developed in terms of like a specific problem you're trying to solve? Because from my experience, as I mentioned, talking to different engineers, I've got a bit of insight from different perspectives, from the back end versus the front end. They're complaining about the ticket, being wrong, or the ticket not being answered quick enough. And so I just wondered, is there some sort of problem that you've noticed within companies that you're trying to solve specifically with this, being more efficient, for example?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it. And I think actually the one of the things that kind of brought it into focus was during the pandemic, COVID. A lot of people who are used to doing things in person, like, hey, Chris, is that thing done? You could just ask, I can like shout over the wall. Everyone went remote, right? And people who are not used to it, we're a remote company and we have been for years, but all of a sudden everybody else was in the remote pool with us. And it was a big challenge for a lot of companies that, again, used to just do things either in person or even with email. And it can get very hard to track. You've got emails kind of, flying around. So that was a time where we had a lot of people coming to us saying, we need something to help keep track of like who's working on what and how much time and how can we communicate. And so it was kind of that coordination issue and understanding, what everyone's working on, and making sure that, you can communicate those things clearly without having to ask people all the time. There's just a single central system everybody can go to and just go look, and you can see, tickets have an owner. That's the person that's working on it. All of the history's on there, like all the back and forth. So if there's been email, like those questions like, hey, it's not fast enough. Like, why are you not working on this? And then there's a system you can go to. Why you're not working on this? Well, there's 5 ahead of you. If you think your thing is higher priority, go get somebody to flip that, and it goes to the top of the list. So I think that was the core we were doing before, but with COVID, it pushed a lot of people to look at their processes and systems and realize that a lot of stuff they were doing in person, they didn't really have something. So we had some people kind of pick up to cover that case.
Was the lockdown or the pandemic beneficial for your company? Did it sort of?
Yeah, it's interesting. And like a lot of people, when it first happened, we didn't know what was going to happen. We were concerned, as everybody was. They're like, there's a lot of uncertainty, because we thought that we might lose customers, right? Who were like, yeah, we can't, pay for support anymore, or we can't do this project, that we had lined up. And because we're having problems with our business, we thought it would ripple through. And we actually did okay. And we did get new customers. We had people coming to us again, as I talked about, trying to sort of add a layer of organization where they didn't have it before. So, and as we know now, as people are kind of looking back and looking at how things kind of worked out, there were companies that did okay, and there were companies that actually did well. I'd say we were right in the middle. Like, we did okay, we lost some, we got some, and we ended up doing okay through the pandemic.
For your own personal position, I saw that you are involved in product development, engineering, and marketing. So I take it this is your passion as well as your job.
Yeah, true. And hosting. We can add that on the list as well. So again, the 20-year startup, we're a small company. So as CTO, I still get involved in all of that stuff. Our software is open source, so you can go to GitHub and you'll see commits from me. I still do code. I still push stuff. And cover all those different areas. In some of my other roles, I did get into product design and marketing, and that can be part of product. Your go-to-market plan, and who is this for, and thinking about all of those things. So yeah, those are areas that I get into as well. So I kind of stretch across all the different parts of the software development cycle.
Nice. Okay. Brilliant. And what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome, and how did you do it?
Just for me personally?
Well, I suppose, with the business in general.
Well, so as I said, we're open source. And so that brings a lot of advantages. We rely on a lot of open source software. So there's a lot of things that we don't have to, personally build for ourselves. But technologies move really fast. And I think that's one of the things that people don't probably fully appreciate with just software in general, any kind, is how much you need to work to just stay at the same level, like not even adding new features, because the world is constantly changing around you, right? So you just look at our application, it's a web application, right? So there's a web server, there's a operating system that it runs on, there's databases that we talk to, email, there's the email interface. All those things are changing constantly. And so you always have to keep up with all that stuff just to stay at the same rate. And then, of course, you want to add new features. There's always things that you want to do. There's always things that your customers want to do. So I think that's something that probably casual users of software don't realize how much effort goes into just staying, just keep it running the way it is. That's a lot of work. And that's where people, I think, why do I need to upgrade? There's no new features. Well, it's to keep everything working. It's because everything's changing around. So I guess for me, that's one of the challenges, both as a technical challenge, but then also there can be a little bit of frustration with that, right? Because there is quite a bit of effort that goes in that you kind of you don't have a cool new feature to tell people. All you did was you kept it running on, database X. So that's a little bit challenging, but it's something that, I think all software has to deal with.
Yeah, I think I'm one of those people as well. When I get an update and I don't see the big change, I'm like,
Exactly. Yeah. That's why the world's changing constantly and around all technology, and you're always running just to stay even.
I will be more patient next time. My last question was just about you personally. If somebody wants to have a similar career as yours, what advice would you give them?
I would say it's probably easier now. Again, I mentioned that we're open source, and there's just so many technology stacks, even for companies whose products themselves are closed. They're on a stack that most often is open source. So I think for people getting into technology now, the fact that you can go to GitHub and just literally like the world software is just there. So if there's something that you get interested in, you can start there. You can actually see the code, and obviously you can go to school and kind of learn, but you can take the stuff that you might do a project, but you can go look and see what other people have done. Professional engineers that have been doing it forever. The code bases are all there, so you can read the code and learn from it, and you can also get involved. And I think that's something that's it's just a huge opportunity for people that with open source project, you just go pick something that's interesting to you. And you can do small things. You could even just fix documentation, and then you push that. You make a pull request, and the project accepts it. You can put that on your resume. I contributed to project X, right? And if it's like a big, well-known project, like that's just a great plus for you. As you try to, like you said, starting off your career. So I think the availability of all the code, you can just read and learn, and then the open ability to, you don't have to get hired to go contribute. You can actually, contribute and sort of get some activity sort of on your resume, on your, history that you can use then and show, I can do this. And I think previously, and with a lot of jobs, you have to get the job first to show that you can do it, right? But with open source software, there's so much out there that you don't have to wait for somebody to give you permission by hiring you. You can just go and contribute and do something. So I think that's, I think it makes things much more open and easier for people to get started.
Yeah, well, it's very cool, just kind of being able to get involved and then be more motivated. So it's a very cool world we live in. Brilliant. Well, I want to wish you all the best with best practice solutions, and thank you for your time. It's been thoroughly interesting, and thank you very much. Have a great day.
Excellent. Thanks. You too.